Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. As always, I'm glad that you've chosen to spend a few moments with me as we continue to talk about the things that Jesus said and taught. Last week, we shifted from what Jesus had to say in the Sermon on the Mount to some of Jesus' most well-known parables, stories that Jesus told to illustrate how God acts and what kind of God it is that we serve. You may recall that last week we talked about two of the three parables that are found in Luke 15. The first of those is about a shepherd who has 100 sheep, and one of those sheep goes astray. And so the shepherd leaves the 99 and goes out in a wide-ranging, fervent search for the one sheep that was lost. Likewise, in the second parable, Jesus told a story about a woman who had 10 coins. Those were her most valued possessions. Well, she misplaced one of those coins. And so, in an effort to find that lost coin, she turned her house absolutely upside down until she found it. Both of those parables emphasize that God is a seeking God. God searches for us. God is interested in the individual. He's interested in you and in me. Now we may think, hey, this world is really big. There are billions of people on this planet. But the truth is, God sees each and every one of us and searches for us when we're lost. Well, that brings us to the third parable in Luke 15, and it's probably one of the best known parables Jesus ever told. We know it as the parable of the prodigal son, and it's different from the first two parables. Let me relate how the story goes. Jesus said a man had two sons. And one day, the youngest son came and said, "Dad, I don't want to wait for you to die to receive my inheritance. Why don't you just go ahead and give it to me now so that I can go and make my way in the world?" Well, the father thinks about this and then grants his son's request, gives him his inheritance early. Well, with that, this young son leaves the family, and as Jesus said, he goes away into a far country. He's a long way from home. Well, while he's there, instead of using his inheritance to better his life, he just spends it all. He just gives in to all of his desires, all of his wants and wishes, and he spends absolutely everything he has. He wakes up one morning and realizes he has nothing left. And so he's reduced to finding work, to finding something to do so he can eat. And he winds up doing one of the lowliest jobs anyone can ever do. He has to tend hogs. And not only that, he is so hungry that he begins to eat some of the feed that's intended for the hogs. Well, after doing this for a while, he wakes up one day and says, even a slave in my father's house is treated better than this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go home and tell my dad, look, I'm not worthy to be your son. You can just make me a slave and I'll be fine. And so he starts out on the journey home. Well, the father looks out the window one day and recognizes the outline of his son's figure in the distance. And he doesn't wait for the son to come to the front door and beg and grovel. No, the father drops absolutely everything and runs to greet his son, to welcome him. And so there's this very wonderful moment where the father grabs hold of the son, wrestles him to the ground, kisses him, hugs him, commands his servants to bring the best robe and to bring a ring and have these items put on his son, because he says, you are not going to be a slave. You are my son. You've always been my son. Even if you left me, you are still my son. And so with that, they throw a huge celebration to welcome the son back home. As the father says, it is right for us to celebrate because this son of mine was lost and now is found. He was far away, but now he is back home. Well, that's a great story, isn't it? Let me call your attention to a couple of things that I think are very, very important in this story. First, if God is really and truly like the Father, as Jesus described, then God trusts us to make our own decisions. We're not puppets. We're not robots. God doesn't control everything that we do. He gives us the freedom to choose. And He gives us the freedom to make choices that are not always the best choices. And what that says is that God trusts us enormously to say, hey, you can make your life, you can do something good with it, and so you're free. Do what you need to do. Make the best choice that you possibly can. And then one of the contrasts here is that unlike the other two parables of the lost sheep and the lost coin, where the main characters in those parables seek and search, here God waits. The Father waits for His Son. He says, I'm going to keep an eye open, waiting for Him to return, hoping He will return. The image I have is of this father at some point every day going to the window at the front of his house and looking down the road just to see perhaps if his son is on his way back home. He doesn't go out and look for him. Instead, he waits for him to make a choice and come home. And in that vein, the most interesting thing here is that when the father sees him, he runs. He runs to meet him. Now that was unheard of in that day and time. Fathers didn't run to their children. Well, what Jesus is telling us is that God runs to greet us. God runs to greet us and gives us an over-the-top welcome whenever we decide to come home. There's no judgment. There's no, I told you so, or you should have done this, or you should have done that. Instead, there is nothing but a warm embrace and us being reminded that no matter where we've been or what we've done, we are still God's children. It's a beautiful story, and there's a lot more to it than what I've relayed to you here. So I hope you'll take a moment and read it for yourself. And as always, if you have any questions, you know how to reach me. I certainly hope that you've gotten off to a good start in school. I wish you well in all of your studies and all of your homework. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon. You take care, and God bless. Bye-bye.